What if the Earth we live on hides secrets beyond imagination? Ancient scholars once divided the world into 7 great regions. They warned of a mysterious ruined quarter, a land so desolate, so harsh, that no life could survive it. They explained earthquakes as trapped vapors shaking the ground. They described mountains rising from clay and sun. They believed seas could become land, and land could drown beneath the sea. This was not fantasy alone. It was their science, their worldview, their attempt to understand a living planet. The brilliant scholar Abu Rayyan Al-Biruni described Earth with striking precision. He explained that the plane of the Sun's apparent path cuts the globe into 2 equal halves, forming what we now call the equator. One half becomes the northern hemisphere, the other, the southern hemisphere. Now imagine another great circle passing through the poles. With this second division, Earth becomes 4 great quarters, 2 northern quarters, 2 southern quarters. Among them, one was considered the inhabited quarter. The inhabited quarter contained everything people knew: seas, islands, mountains, rivers, deserts, cities and kingdoms. Yet even within this inhabited region, vast lands remained empty, not because they did not exist, but because humans could not survive the cold and permanent snow. Already, ancient scholars recognized climate boundaries. Other scholars offered a slightly different view. They believed both northern quarters were inhabited. The northwestern quarter stretched from Iraq to Arabia, to the Levant, Egypt, Byzantium, and Europe. The northeastern quarter extended from Iraq through Persia, to Khorasan, Tibet, and the distant lands of China. The southern hemisphere was divided into 2 quarters as well. One was said to contain the peoples of Africa, Zanj, Abyssinians, Nubians. The other southern quarter was different, mysterious, untouched, unreached, a land bordering known territories, yet never explored. A story tells of a Greek king who sent an expedition to explore that unknown southwestern quarter. The men traveled far. They searched for cities, for animals, for life. They returned with devastating news. Nothing. No settlements. No livestock. No vegetation. Only barren land stretching endlessly beneath a blazing sky. And so it was named the ruined quarter. Some called it the burned quarter, imagining heat so intense that survival was impossible. After dividing Earth into quarters, scholars divided the inhabited quarter further, into 7 great longitudinal regions called climes. Imagine immense horizontal bands stretching from east to west. The first clime, nearest the equator, was the longest and widest. It stretched nearly 3,000 farsakhs in length and about 150 in width. The 7th clime, far north, was shorter and narrower. The 5 climes between them gradually varied in size. These were not natural borders. They were imaginary lines, tools created by early kings and explorers. Ancient thinkers believed dense vapors gathered beneath the earth. If they could not cool into water, and if solid ground trapped them, pressure would build. When these vapors struggled to rise, the ground would tremble violently. They compared this to fever in the human body. Just as trapped moisture turns to vapor and causes shaking, so too does Earth tremble until release. Sometimes the surface cracked open. Fire and smoke burst forth. Volcanoes. In their understanding, earthquakes and volcanoes were connected. 2 expressions of pressure beneath the ground. The Earth, to them, was alive. But did ancient scholars believe that Earth's features were permanent? No. They imagined the planet as constantly changing. Plains could rise into mountains. Dry land could become sea. Seas could retreat and reveal new land. Nothing was fixed. Earth was in motion. They proposed that when water mixes with sticky clay, and the sun's heat acts upon it over long periods, the mixture hardens into stone. Just as soft clay turns into brick when exposed to fire, so too can Earth transform into solid rock. Through this process, they believed mountains were born. They suggested 2 additional causes for rising mountains. First, earthquakes. When the ground shifts, some regions sink while others rise. Over time, the elevated lands harden and become mountains. Second, wind. Wind carries soil from one place to another, forming hills and valleys. With time and heat, these 2 harden into rock. Mountains, in this view, were not placed, they were formed. Then comes one of the boldest ideas. According to the author of Almagisti, the apogees of planets move through the 12 zodiac signs, completing a full cycle every 36,000 years. As these celestial positions shift north and south, the angles of sunlight upon Earth change. With this change comes a transformation in climate. Day and night lengths vary. Winter and summer shift. Heat and cold redistribute across the globe. As climate changes, so too does human life. Civilized lands can become barren. Deserts can become fertile. Seas may dry into plains. Plains may sink beneath water. Mountains may flatten into valleys. Valleys may rise into peaks. This was a vision of a vast geological cycle that never stops. But how do mountains turn back into plains? Ancient thinkers believed constant sunlight and celestial influence dry out mountain moisture. Lightning strikes break them apart. Rocks fracture into smaller stones. Stones crumble into sand. Floodwaters carry these fragments into rivers. And rivers carry them into the sea. When rivers carry broken fragments of mountains into the sea, those materials do not disappear. They settle. Layer upon layer, sediment accumulates at the ocean floor. Over immense periods of time, these layers compress and harden. And thus, new hills and even mountains are formed beneath the sea. Just as wind builds dunes in the desert, water builds mountains beneath the waves. This, they believed, explains a curious phenomenon. Sometimes, when stones are broken open, one finds shells, or bones, embedded inside. These were once part of mud mixed with sea remains, before that mud hardened into rock. To them, fossils were signs that land and sea had changed places over time. As sediments accumulate in one part of the sea, water must move elsewhere. It spreads outward, flooding nearby land. But eventually, the accumulated deposits rise high enough to reach the surface. The seabed dries. Grass grows. Trees take root. Animals arrive. And what was once sea becomes habitable land. At the same time, other regions may sink or erode. Water floods lowlands. Coastlines shift. Land becomes sea. Sea becomes land. And human settlements follow these changes. Hunters come first. Then farmers. Then cities rise. Earth reshapes civilization. Ancient thinkers also reflected on why mountains exist at all. The Cure describes mountains as pegs placed so that the earth would not shake excessively. Some scholars reasoned that without mountains, the earth would be smooth and round. And if it was smooth, ocean waters might spread and cover the entire surface, as air surrounds water. Without mountains, they believed the diversity of minerals, plants, and animals would not be possible. Thus, mountains were seen as anchors. They prevented the earth from excessive movement. They provided structure to the land. They allowed life to exist in variety and balance. Mountains were not obstacles. They were necessary. Others emphasized a more practical function. Mountains are reservoirs of fresh water. Water begins as vapor rising into the sky. Clouds form. Mountains block the winds, holding clouds in place until cold air turns them into rain or snow. If Earth were completely smooth, without elevation or valleys, vapor would not remain in the sky long enough to condense. It would dissipate back into air. Rain would fall only in small amounts, quickly absorbed into the ground. Summer would bring drought. Life would struggle. Thus, mountains were essential for maintaining the water cycle. Within mountains lie caves, caverns, and hidden chambers. When rain and snow fall upon the peaks, water seeps into these interior spaces. It remains stored there, like water in a giant natural reservoir. Eventually, water finds narrow passages through rock. It emerges at the mountain's base as springs and flowing streams. These streams nourish plants and animals. What exceeds their need returns to the sea. When the mountain's stored water runs low, winter returns. Snow falls again. Rain replenishes the hidden reservoirs. And the cycle begins anew. This process continues, they believed, until the end of time. Thus, before listing specific mountains, ancient scholars had already built an entire vision of Earth, a world divided into quarters, organized into 7 climes, shaped by vapors, winds, and celestial cycles, stabilized by mountains, sustained by water. Now, they turn from theory to example, and they begin to name the mountains, one by one, with their strange properties and astonishing legends.